How about this one, honey? Can I take that one? It's about you. I will see if she will answer, and I will answer for her if she decides not to, but it's an interesting question.
You can explain more than me. You remember.
Okay. So our friend Steve Darrow again says, your beautiful Natasha may not be old enough to remember, but I would be interested to know if she has any memories of life under the Soviet Union and during the transition after the fall of the Soviet Union. And the answer is yes, she does have some memories about it. She was pretty young at the time, and I'm not going to ask her to come up here and talk about it. And I, needless to say, know she lived through it, years of her life, and I didn't. But I will tell you one or two things that I heard about that I thought made sense. And one of them was we were watching something. Maybe it was China. I think it was actually looking at like a scene from The Last Emperor. And it was during the Cultural Revolution at the end of the movie, and all these young kids were coming out and waving red flags and doing their little routines and dancing and stuff. And Natasha said, it's just exactly the way I grew up, and everybody hated it, and everybody knew it was just nonsense, just complete bullshit. Everybody knew it. And we had to go up and do it anyway. My fiance was a pioneer. She was one of those kids who wore a red scarf and was going to, presumably grow up to be being engineered to grow up to be a trustworthy member of the Communist Party and somebody, with the revolution still in mind. But obviously she came so late to that horrible party that by the time she was old enough to understand what was going on, nobody believed in it anymore. I don't even think the leadership believed in it anymore. By the time we got into the 80s, late 70s, 80s, I don't even think the communists believed in communism anymore. It was just something they couldn't let go of, and it was something really, really bad. And that's the downside, Steve, is all those things that as an American you think, wow, that must be really rough, all the propaganda and all the restriction on information and all the rest of it. And yeah, that's bad. But there's some good stuff there too. It's not good about the Soviet Union. The Soviets were horrible. The Bolsheviks were terrible, horrible people. But there is much about life in the Soviet Union that I did not know about, and that is just delightful. For example, once she got here, we started watching Russian movies with subtitles, and it turned out they were all Soviet films. They're Soviet-era films, mid to late 60s, early 70s. And they were comedies, and they were hilarious. They were hilarious. And I remember thinking, if we'd seen these movies, there wouldn't be any Cold War, because there's so much humanity in them, and they're so just genuinely wonderful, wonderful movies. My favorite by far is Ivan Vasilievich Changes His Profession. It's absolutely brilliant. There's a guy who, living in an apartment block in 1968 or something, invents a time machine. He just does it in his living room. And that's incidental to the story, because what the story's about is there's a very petty, very small kind of a Soviet bureaucrat who's the building administrator. He's a very small-minded little man. And this scientist opens up this, turns on the time machine, and one of the walls of the apartment disappears, and it connects to a wall of Ivan the Terrible. It takes these people's living rooms into the palace of Ivan the Terrible. And by happy coincidence, Ivan the Terrible looks exactly like this guy. And this petty bureaucrat goes back to the time of Ivan the Terrible, and Ivan the Terrible comes back to the modern age, and he's running around trying to kill people with swords and stuff. It's hilarious, and it's very, very clever, and it's very human. And I don't think there's an American analog of this. I can't think of one anyway. There are a number of movies, at least I've seen 6 or 7 at least, and there's probably more, that feature these 3 actors. And one of them has been in a number of movies by himself. He's kind of a famous clown. I don't think the other 2 have. But you can't compare them to the Three Stooges, because it was not very much physical comedy. They were just great emotional actors. A big fat guy, kind of a homely-looking clown, very sad, kind guy, and then a very neurotic, thin-lipped kind of, coward. And the 3 of them go on all these adventures. They're just watching a movie, and here they come. Here's the 3 of them again. It's wonderful. They're great. And one of those scenes, I laughed so hard I thought I was going to die. It was just hilariously funny. that was a pleasant surprise. I'm thinking about this for a second. It's just a fascinating thing, you know, to really understand as much as you can anyway another culture. One of the things I'm most proud of in my life, as a matter of fact, not just in my relationship but in my life, I'm just quite unbelievably and inordinately proud of the fact that my fiance constantly tells me that I know more about Russian history than she does, and she always gets a real education when I start laying out the Romanovs and all the rest of it. That I was very interested in Russia, big fan of Russia before I met her, and what the Bolsheviks did to those people is... The Bolsheviks are the lesson of this century. They're the lesson of humanity, the Bolsheviks, not the Nazis. The Nazis are an aberration. Everybody wants to control things. Everybody wants to be... The Bolsheviks are they're just unbelievable how they cannibalize themselves and so on. But there's just so many pleasant surprises about Russia, and even really nice surprises about the Soviets. And I'm going to close this show